everyone, and welcome to the Mass Timber webinar for March 31st, 2022, bringing mass timber to Lumbertown, Adelaide Pointe's Muskegon Lake vision. Very excited to welcome you to this conversation today. My name is Sandra Lupien. I am your moderator, and my program, Mass Timber at MSU, is the co-host of this webinar series, which occurs approximately every other month. Mass Timber at MSU is a program at Michigan State University. We leverage education, science, outreach, communication, and policy to advance mass timber manufacture and construction in Michigan and the surrounding region. We're a partnership across the Michigan State University Department of Forestry, the School of Planning, Design, and Construction, and the Extension, all under the umbrella of the Michigan State University College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And we operate with funding support from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, as well as the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. A little bit about us. And then our co-host for these webinars is MIFB, the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute. MIFB fosters sustainable forests, communities, and economies through innovative and responsible production, use, and recycling of forest biomaterials. MIFB is independent and nonprofit, and it's 100% volunteer driven. And they really consider themselves conveners and educators on these issues. So we love co-hosting with our great partner, MIFB. A little bit of housekeeping today, webinar logistics. As you join the call, you are muted and your video is off. The only video that we'll see today is of our presenters, as well as mine as your moderator. And then if you have questions that you'd like to type into the Q&A feature at any time during this webinar, feel free to do so. And we will entertain your questions during a question and answer period after our presenters introduce this topic and talk about Adelaide Pointe, their excellent project. Great. Speaking of our presenters today are Emily Leestma with Leestma Management and Jason Korb of Korb Architects. Very excited for you to meet these two today. And I always say that I have the best job. And one of my favorite parts of my job is talking with developers and architects, engineers, folks in construction who are considering mass timber for upcoming projects, really thinking about it, or who are in the process of planning a mass timber project. There's a lot of activity along these lines bubbling up here in Michigan, where my work is focused. And you know, it's coming from a variety of different sectors. So we're going to be hearing about more and more mass timber buildings becoming reality here in Michigan in the coming months and years. But Adelaide Pointe was the first one of these projects I learned about back when I started my job in July. This was one of the first conversations I had was with this team, and I was so inspired by it, and I've just been waiting for an opportunity to bring them into our webinar so that they could share what they're up to with you. So Emily Leestma with Leestma Management, with Ryan Leestma, her husband, have a really bold vision for the 30-acre lakefront property that we're going to be talking about today in their West Michigan town, Muskegon. And the project is called Adelaide Pointe. It's going to feature a marina, boat storage, restaurants, retail, apartments, condos, all kinds of different things, mixed use at its finest, right? But the Leestmas are prioritizing a variety of sustainability approaches across the project, which Emily will tell you about, including using mass timber for most of the buildings, including the condos. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And to start us off now, I would like to introduce you to Emily Leestma, and she is going to introduce you to Adelaide Pointe. All right, Emily, take it away.
For the introduction, and thanks for using my LinkedIn photo as my headshot. Little backstory is when we first moved into our new office, there was a mini golf hole there, and I was caught playing mini golf when I should have been working, and that was the picture. So anyway, as Sandra said, my name is Emily Leestma. My husband Ryan and I are developers in Muskegon, Michigan, which if you're not familiar with Muskegon, it's on the west side of Michigan. Sandra, I really appreciate, just want to take a second to say I really appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to talk a little bit about our development. And I really commend you for all the work you've done since July. I didn't realize, you know, time flies when you're a developer, so I didn't realize that you just started in July. You've really done a lot of work helping to champion mass timber, and I really appreciate that. So what my main goal of this webinar is to introduce you to our project as a whole at Adelaide Pointe, and also tell you about all of the sustainable things that we're doing to create, a really sustainable community in addition to mass timber. We also have Jason Korb on the call, as Sandra mentioned. Jason is one of our architects and is really an expert in mass timber. So I'm going to revert all of the engineering-based questions and things like that to Jason. I'd like to just give you a general overview of our project and our vision for Muskegon. Next slide. So Ryan and I bought this property just over a year ago in 2021. The property is a brownfield redevelopment. It was a former industrial property. And when we purchased the property, we thought this was just a really prime place for development, but also just a really beautiful piece of property on the shores, the south shores of Muskegon Lake. If you're not familiar with Muskegon Lake dumps right into Lake Michigan. I might be a little bit biased because I live in Muskegon, but really some of the best boating in the state of Michigan, I think, is done in Muskegon. Muskegon is really rich with natural resources, but also really full of industrial sites that 20, 30 years ago many of the sites were vacated. And a lot of those sites happen to be on the waterfront. And so really our vision for this property is not only to develop a waterfront community, but to really appreciate the natural resources that Muskegon has to offer and make this one of the most sustainable marina communities in Michigan. And really, I think what it's turning out to be is one of the most sustainable marina communities in the country. We're really pushing our team to find ways to be as sustainable as possible. So when Ryan and I bought this property, we thought it would be a great property for a marina. We knew that another marina was really needed in Michigan or in Muskegon. What we didn't know at the time, and I'm actually glad that we didn't, is that we're undertaking the largest marina development project in Michigan in over 30 years. So not a small undertaking. What we really see this as is the next step in the transformation of the Muskegon waterfront. So as I said, a lot of industry left Muskegon 20, 30 years ago and left a lot of these sites private but vacant, meaning that the public couldn't enjoy the waterfront space that Muskegon has to offer. And so one of the things we're really passionate about is, one, increasing the tourism-based economy that Muskegon is now transforming into, and two, increasing public access to Muskegon Lake and all that the natural resources that Muskegon has to offer. We also needed to do a lot of brownfield cleanup. So like I said, this was a former industrial site, and I'll get a little bit into the history of the site in a second. We wanted to be the most sustainable waterfront development in Michigan. We want to be a prototype for how to really create a sustainable community, environmentally and economically. And then lastly, just something that's really cool is that the mass timber structures, in addition to being environmentally sustainable, they also really tell the story of Muskegon. So next slide. So the history of the site, just because it ties into mass timber, I thought I'd include it. In the 1870s, it was actually a lumber mill. The natural peninsulas that we have on our site are former lumber piers, which is really cool. After the lumber mill left, then it became the West Strand Foundry. Really cool. There's a lot of patents in technology that was part of that foundry, including the fifth wheel hitch, which we think is really cool. But one thing that we wanted to do in using mass timber as a building material, in addition to creating environmental sustainability, we also wanted to really tell the history of this site, which was the lumber mill and all the submerged logs. We thought that was really cool. And using that natural wood materials would really bring out that history. Next slide. So here's the site not too long after we purchased it. Looks a little bit different now because we've continued cleanup on this site. We spent the better part of last summer really cleaning up the site, removing some invasive species, getting grass to grow again, removing slag that was left from the foundry, cleaning up trash, all sorts of things that we did to really help mitigate the site. There was also a fence that we took down because we really want to make it a safe and enjoyable place for the public to go. You see the public bike path there. I really commend the city for creating that bike path. It's one of my favorite parts of the city of Muskegon. That bike path connects downtown Muskegon to the lakeshore and beyond, all of the neighborhoods as well. So one thing that was really important for us is to create a development that did not get rid of that bike path. So we're actually increasing bike path access or increasing the length of the bike path by creating some public parks, which I'll get into in a second. But overall, one of our big themes of the development is to really expand public access to Muskegon Lake. So this is the property when we bought it. And then if you turn to the next slide, you've already seen this. This is really our vision of where this site is going. So as you see, we're creating a 270 slit marina. We're also creating, on the far edge, you'll see a rock wall that needs to protect the marina, but that's also going to have a walking path on the top to create a public fishing pier, which is really important. It's a deep water fishing pier, and I think that's really important for the fishing community in Muskegon. You see on those peninsulas, we're turning those peninsulas from being relatively washed out. A lot of it got damaged in high water levels. We're creating public parks. We're filling that in and creating public parks, expanding the bike path, and creating a lot of public green space for everyone to enjoy. And in addition to all of that, of course, all the buildings you see, which is particularly important for this webinar, those are all comprised of mass timber. Next slide. Like I said, we're really pushing our team to help create one of the most sustainable communities, become a prototype of sorts for creating sustainable communities in Michigan. And several of the ways we're doing that include brownfield cleanup, of course, I mentioned. One thing that we're doing is we're installing solar on every single one of our buildings. My husband and I own a solar company. We're really passionate about solar generation to offset energy, both energy bills and to get clean energy. We're also prototyping solar docks. So actually on the docks of the marina, we'll have a solar panel with a pad over top of it. So those docks, we hope to generate solar from those docks, as well as portions of the bike path. We're prototyping a material to create a solar bike path where people can walk, ride their bike, take their dog, whatever, across the bike path, but it will still be generating solar. We're really excited about that partnership and those prototypes. We have the capacity to put some low-profile wind turbines on our site. We're using green roofs on some of our buildings, using dark sky lighting. We've partnered with some really great biologists to create a native plant palette for all of our public parks. And we're also using soft shorelines. So actually, Sandra, if you go up a slide back to our one of our site plans, there you go. So what I mean by soft shoreline, this is pretty unique for a marina. Usually inside the central basin of a marina, you'll see rock or concrete or something. That's actually really can be quite harmful to the environment. So what we're proposing to do is to create a soft shoreline, meaning to create green, natural, native plants that really slope into the marina rather than creating a harsh barrier from the land to the marina. So that's why you see the boats are a little bit pushed out, and we have a lot of green space between the marina and the bike path, because we're using that soft shoreline, which improves habitat for all of your aquatic animals and some land animals, and also improves your water quality. So we found that to be really important in the engineering of our marina. You can go back. We're getting Michigan Clean Marina certification. And then, of course, as we all know, for the purpose of this webinar, we're using mass timber structures as all of our structures on site. Next slide. So here's our overall site plan, and I'll get more into some of these buildings as we go through. But just walking from the left to the right, those big white buildings you see on the bottom, those are either existing industrial buildings, or we're also building a boat condo building. But that back end that's not toward the water is more of our industrial portion of our site that's already there. Toward the water, moving toward the water from left to right, all of these structures will be comprised of mass timber. The one that Sandra's pointing at right now is that first condo building, which Jason Korb will talk about in just a minute. The big square is potentially an apartment complex, which will probably be one of our last developments in the project. Those two rectangular buildings, one will likely be another condo building, and one will likely be a hotel. We're very excited to potentially have a hotel operator on board who is really great. And also would like to push the envelope and comprise his hotel also of mass timber. So we're very excited about that potential partnership. And then to the right of those, we have the multi-use building, which I'm going to talk about in greater detail in just a minute. And then those back buildings are either more condo buildings, or we have a senior living facility that's also looking at some space there. So in total, we'll have about 7 structures that are all comprised of mass timber. Next slide. So here are our phases. When Ryan and I first bought the property, we had this nice 10-year plan of how the phases were going to play out, and this is going to be a project for 10 years, and we were going to go at a nice pace. And Jason Korb might agree with me when I say we're really pushing our team and our timeline to move a little bit faster, because what we found as we started to announce some of our plans and vision, there's a very high demand for residential space on the waterfront, as well as for marina space and for increased retail in Muskegon. Muskegon's a real emerging economy. We're very excited to latch onto that to help develop the growth of Muskegon. So our team is being challenged a little bit by our timeline, but we find it really important to meet that demand. So in phase 1, just very quickly, we completed that in 2021. We got our PUD approval, but most importantly, we assembled our team. So Ryan and I always like to say we're never the smartest ones in the room, but we do assemble a pretty great team of really smart people who know what they're doing. And I think we've assembled some of the best teammates in the country to help us create a sustainable waterfront community, which is really important. Just a quick shout out to Edgewater Resources, who I won't be talking about for the purpose of this webinar because they're not mass timber architects, but they did all of our site design and are just incredible sustainable waterfront community developers. We did a lot of brownfield cleanup, as I talked about, gutted the buildings, things like that in 2021. So here we are in 2022. We have just a few things going on. I don't know if you noticed or not, but in the original picture that I showed you of our site, we have the bike path that's current, but we currently don't have any roads or utilities running through our development project. So one of our main focuses in the beginning of 2022, starting now or maybe a week from now after our spring break respite, are getting roads and utilities built for our project. We also need to do a lot of site prep work for our marina, dredging, et cetera, which I won't get into for the purpose of this webinar. But one thing that is exciting for the purpose of this webinar is the start of our multi-use building. So I mentioned our multi-use building, which was in the right-hand corner of our site plan. That multi-use building will house a retailer on the first floor. That retailer is Springbrook Yachts. They're based mostly in Chicago, but they're adding a site in West Michigan, which we're really excited about. On the second floor of that building will be a restaurant called Barrio Tacos. Barrio is based in Cleveland, but there are sites in Lansing and Traverse City, and they're opening one in Grand Rapids, so you might be familiar. And then on the top floor, we're going to have corporate and wedding events, which we're also very excited about. And I'll get more into that building in just a minute. Also expanding public parks in 2022. Phase 3 is 2023. This is where Jason Korb really comes in with the building of our first condo building. Also that hotel potential that we're really excited about, and we'll continue to expand parks. And then phase 4 is basically everything else. That's 2025 and beyond. We'll add more residential units, potential senior living facilities, et cetera. Next slide. Like I said, here we are in phase 2. Phase 2 is comprised both of building that marina that you see in the central basin and building the multi-use building. We're also, to the right of that, you'll see a little finger of water. That's the East Basin, which I'm not going to talk about anymore today. I'm also not going to talk anymore about the marina design or development today, but if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out after this webinar. What I will focus on today, though, is the construction of that multi-use building, which is in the right-hand corner of your screen. And that multi-use building is really our first go-around between that and the condo building, our first go-around at really engineering and architecting using mass timber. Next slide. So the architects for our multi-use building is, primary architect is Architectura. They're a local architectural firm, really specialized in Scandinavian design, based in Grand Haven. Really great design architects. One thing I want to point out from a developer's point of view when we're talking about mass timber is one thing that was really important for Ryan and I is to really promote the use of mass timber, not just for our development, but for the rest of Michigan. We're so excited to see so much interest in mass timber construction in Michigan. And one way to really promote the use of mass timber in other developments is to bring local architectural and construction firms on board on our project, because we are actually now the biggest mass timber development project in Michigan. We'd like to bring a lot of partners on board to get everyone experienced in what it takes to architect, engineer, and construct a mass timber building. So it was important when we were assembling our team to bring on experts such as Korb and Associates and some of our construction firms and things like that are really experts in mass timber, as well as bringing on some of our local architectural firms, contractors, builders, et cetera, so that they could also begin to understand what it takes to put together a mass timber building. So Architectura, while great architects don't have any experience, this was their first go around in mass timber construction. They've been doing a great job so far, or mass timber architecture. They've been doing a great job so far. Our construction manager is Journey Construction Group out of Grand Rapids. And then our timber supplier for this building is Binderholz. If you're not familiar with Binderholz, Binderholz is probably one of the most well-known mass timber manufacturers in the world. They're just huge, very knowledgeable. We're working with their engineer to help design this building. Really great company to work with. And one of the reasons why we chose Binderholz, aside from their expertise, is also their timeline. So this building is on quite a tight timeline, and we needed some of this product as quickly as possible, and Binderholz could supply that. All right, next slide. So here's a rendering of that multi-use building that we're building. There are a couple changes that have happened since this rendering, but not too many. So as you can see, on the first floor is that boat retailer. On the second floor is the restaurant, and on the third floor is that event space. Like I said, I'm going to leave all engineering and architecting questions to Jason Korb, who is an absolute expert in that field. But there's one thing that I just wanted to mention about this building, because I do know that we have a lot of architects and engineers on this call. So creating a mass timber building for a boat retailer is not easy. You need very large spans in order to get boats in and also be able to maneuver boats around. And mass timber doesn't always allow for very large clear spans. And so the way that we're engineering this building is we're using steel wrapped timber for that first floor for those spans, because we couldn't find clear spans that were large enough for boat retailers. And I think the technology is coming along, and maybe some of you know more about that than I do. I'm really encouraged by some of the things that I see. And I'm excited to learn more at the Mass Timber Conference, actually, because I think as we start to develop these buildings for, I think they would be considered non-traditional uses, such as industrial, it's important to start thinking about how we can use mass timber in larger spans in order to really accommodate some of these, non-traditional uses for structures. The second and third floor are all comprised all of mass timber, except for the kitchen of the restaurant. Of course, we need some concrete in there. Next slide. So here's just another image of right here. You're looking out over the second floor of that restaurant, looking out over the marina. And in addition to, of course, the history of the site using mass timber and the environmental sustainability of mass timber, it's also just aesthetically wonderful. There's a lot of research coming out showing the positive effects of being around natural spaces. And that's one thing that we also want to educate the public on, is just, mass timber, in addition to some of its environmental benefits, are also really beneficial for you psychologically. So it's just a really beautiful space to be in. Next slide. Here's just another rendering. So you can see here that in addition to the mass timber building, we're also, you can't see this here, but on the roof of that building, we're installing solar, like I mentioned before. And we're also using some green roofs. So in this case, the green roof will serve for both environmental purposes and also be a wind barrier actually for that restaurant. We also really in the design really wanted to promote like the indoor outdoor use, the use of, the aesthetic of how you bring the outside in and the inside out. So that was one thing that was really important in the design of this building. So we used a lot of windows and garage doors, things like that in the design of this building, which I think turned out really beautiful. I do want to just quick mention again from the developer point of view, when we looked at costing for this building, costing for mass timber actually came out really similarly to costing for traditional building materials. Of course, this is a mass timber hybrid building, but even when we looked at some of our complete mass timber estimates, really right now, mass timber is pricing out very similarly to regular building materials because mass timber is a little bit more protected from some of the fluctuations in our economy because a lot of those mass timber manufacturing companies are completely encapsulated, right? They have their own forests. So of course we can't control shipping costs, but everything else it seems to have priced out pretty comparable, which is great and speaks to how environmental sustainability can also translate to economic sustainability, which is really important for developers. We need to think about how to incentivize developers to use mass timber. The biggest thing to do is to make sure that it's the same price. If it's too expensive, then it becomes unfeasible. But right now, it's very economically feasible to use mass timber as a building material. Next slide. Like I said, that's phase 2. We hope to break ground sometime this summer. And we're looking for completion of that building in the late spring, early summer of 2023. We'd like all of our tenants to have a very successful 2023 summer season. And so we're really hoping to finish that building in 2023. So watch out for that. And now here we are. This is phase 3, which will start in 2023 and go to 2024. What's circled right now is that potential hotel. That's not finalized right now, so I don't want to really discuss it, but we're really excited about that opportunity. And in addition to the hotel is that long building on your left, which is the first condo building, which Jason Korb is going to talk a little bit more about now. So I'm going to kick it back to Sandra, and then we'll hear a little bit more from Jason about some of the engineering and design behind that first condo building.
Great, Emily. Thank you so much. That was a really, I thought it was a very clear and inspiring presentation about the vision for Adelaide Pointe, and it'll be extremely enjoyable to dive into the nuts and bolts of the design, architecture, and engineering of these mass timber buildings with architect Jason Korb of Korb Architects. I did want to flag that for our audience that Jason and Korb Architects are the architects of the Ascent Tower in Milwaukee, which is going to be, at least until something else happens and another one comes for a time, the tallest mass timber structure in the world. So very excited that that will be right across Lake Michigan from us here in Michigan. So hopefully a field trip is in our future.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to say one thing before Jason introduces himself. We looked up mass timber architects when Ryan and I first decided to build with mass timber. And we found Jason's name through the Ascent building, as Sandra mentioned. And we thought this guy really knows his stuff, right? Since it's the tallest mass timber building in the world. And only later did we find out he's just a ferry right away in Milwaukee. So we literally hop on a ferry that's based in Muskegon, go across 2 hours across the lake, and there's Jason. So it was kind of fate to have him on the team.
It's pretty great, and I love that connection across the lake. So without further delay, Jason, I'd love for you to take it away. I'll advance to your first slide, and then I'll put myself back on mute.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon for you. It's Jason Korb, KA, here to talk about the first residential building at Adelaide Pointe. So brief overview of our firm. We're about a 21-person architecture and interior design firm located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but we sort of work all over the country, increasingly so in the mass timber space. So it's just a brief overview of our company. This is a very old picture of Ascent. The building is now actually topped off and enclosed. So we were there yesterday, and it will start getting its first residents at the end of June and be totally done by the end of August of this year. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So when we met with Emily and Ryan Leestma first met right about just under a year ago, they presented us with this, this spectacular site on Muskegon Lake, surrounded by water on three sides. And really, these are the parameters that we ultimately landed on. That is, it was imperative that every condominium unit had expansive water views, which led us to produce a single loaded corridor building, which is a little bit unusual, but it was the right solution for this site. It's all about, this building is designed inside out, so it's really all about capturing those views. It's almost designed as though it were a resort property in the Caribbean, but right here in Michigan. And so this is a little bit out of date. We've actually increased our units counts. Oh no, you have it right. So our end cap units are 1,850 square feet, luxury 3-bedroom units. They have exposure on three sides, which we'll see. And then the interior, even the interior units are 2-bedroom units, again with a 27-foot clear glass wall facing the water, and which we'll see shortly. There's 45 of those. It's a ground floor podium. So the way this building is built is 5 stories of wood, which we'll dive into a little further, over a concrete podium. And we'll talk about the thinking that led to that decision here shortly. But so we have a concrete podium with 5 floors of mass timber hybrid above it. And then you may recall from the site plan, to the north and west of the building is a pool that's dedicated to the residents with other outdoor amenities. Other indoor amenities include a gym inside the building, as well as community and sort of a party room that spills out onto the patio overlooking the pool. We'll see that shortly. Next slide, please. So again, this building was really designed inside out. So we're looking at the building from the water. So what you can basically see is the entire exposure of the building facing Muskegon Lake is A, operable glass, and B, continuous terraces. You can't see it very well, but there are frosted glass dividers in between the terraces for privacy. But each unit has its own private balcony facing the water that's and they're about 28 feet on center, so functionally 27 feet clear. And then the north wall of the building, where you can see some wood cladding, that is the end wall of the 3-bedroom unit that is exposed again on 3 sides. And then the glass in the ground floor, that is the party space and fitness center, again overlooking the water. The more solid wall to the lower right is the enclosed heated parking. If we could take the next slide, please. Here we are looking back at, ironically, at the corridor side. So we can see in the 3-bedroom end cap units, the glass turning the corner and looking back towards the land. On the service side, if you will, we have 2 stair and elevator towers, which you can see foreground and background. So ownership desired that the elevators be glassed in, which is what you're seeing here. So we have glass elevators, and then the solid areas are the 2 fire stairs. If you look carefully, the glass wall infilling between those 2 towers are actually the corridors in the buildings. But if you look carefully, you can see that we're designing a shelf system that supports a solar panel array tilted north or up towards the sun, and then inboard of that a small planter box with some seagrasses in it. So if you look carefully, you can see there's plantings marching up that wall. And then Senator Cursor pointed out, we also have a full solar array on the roof. You can see the sawtooth of those panels poking their noses out above the roof line. And then in the very lower left is the entrance to the parking. The building lobby is obscured by that car in the foreground. It's at the far end of the building, closer to the water side. Next slide, please. And then to just give some vignettes of what the experience might be inside, this is a den in the 3-bedroom corner unit. So there's a multi-function room in most of the units. A lot of this design was driven, this building started design, a year into COVID, and what we're seeing is a lot of flex spaces being built into buildings. So this could be a sleeping alcove, it could be a home office, it could be a media den, whatever you want it to be. It's just a small flex space. What you'll start to see, and we'll dive in a little further on this, is the corners of the building as designed today is where we would start to see more glulam. So the corners of the 3-bedroom units, to fully capture these views of entirely glass, are supported by glulam columns and beams. And again, we'll dive into that a little more moving ahead. Next slide, please. And this is in the 3-bedroom unit. So we start to look back, and one consideration with mass timber is you have to conceal services in a multifamily building. So what we find without exception is that a certain amount of the timber ceilings or floor assemblies tend to be obscured by drywall soffits, which then have all of the building services in it. So this is actually a top floor unit. You can tell because you can see a little snippet of skylight that we have in the corridor top center. But in the kitchen stacks below this unit would look much like this. But what we would see in that drywall soffit is the plumbing, fire protection, and air distribution coming down from the unit above. In our case, we're also using a concealed soffit to uplight the CLT ceiling deck. The floor assemblies in a timber building tend to be actually fairly traditional because of sound considerations. We are pouring some kind of gypcrete or concrete topping on top of the CLT, then receives sound mats in a more traditional finish floor. Next slide, please. Again, just looking back from the glass wall, seeing the beauty of the timber. So the goal is the timber is exposed, and from a practical standpoint, it winds up being about 50% coverage. And that's, again, in this case, we are as of right from a code standpoint, which we can talk about, but it winds up being nominally 50% just because that's the amount of coverage we need to conceal all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems from above. Next slide, please. And then the whole point of this is, again, we are using a sliding glass wall on the water side. Again, here we are in the corner unit. So we have both the direct water view from the terrace, which is an aluminum balcony, which is clipped to the side of the building, not timber. We have a artificial timber deck perhaps applied to it. We're still working through that. But it's important that the exterior materials of these buildings be non-combustible. But you can also see in this corner unit, the glass is turning the corner on the far right. Next slide, please. And then a better view of what that real corner experience would be like. Emily actually had one of her contractors fly a drone over the site. So this is the actual view of Muskegon Lake, and then off in the distance is the cut that takes you to Lake Michigan. But this is, so these are the units that are really sort of the marquee units in the building. And Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are the ones that are receiving the most interest, even though they're the highest price point. And again, you can see in these end cap units, this is where we encounter the most glulam. Most of the interior units do not have any glulam, but the current framing plan has our CLT running parallel to the long axis of the building. And therefore, in order to open up these end cap walls, we can't have bearing walls, obviously, which is why we are starting to see glulam in that condition. We are currently working with Emily and various manufacturers on different framing options, which will require us to consider glulam beams in different locations. And so we're actually still working through that. We're doing what's called optimization, which is in the Midwest, there's still a bit of a premium on the material side for mass timber. The premium for glulam, because of the presses, is greater than the premium for cross-laminated timber. So absolutely maximizing the efficiency of glulam in particular is critical from a cost standpoint. Next slide, please. And so the other part of this is, it's important to think about, how these things get put together. So this is a detail from Ascent, but this is a simple, what's called a bearing connection. So you can basically see how simple it is. The glulam column is notched and the beams bear directly on it. And we have a total of about 8 screws that hold the thing together. They're screwed in the field. The column to column connection you see top center, those columns will show up with those plates already installed, which speaks to some pre-construction coordination differences between mass timber and more traditional construction projects. But those plates and the holes to receive the screws that bolt the columns together, those are installed in the factory and they show up ready to assemble. So once a crew really gets going, they can set a column basically every 15 minutes or so. One of the advantages of mass timber is its absolute, it's the speed at which it goes up is sort of unprecedented. So again, at the end of it at Ascent, we were doing a floor every 5.5 days. And that was a 17,000 square foot floor plate. So it's about half the time of a concrete floor of that size. Next slide, please. Other considerations that we had to deal with here at Adelaide Pointe is, we are in a maritime climate. We have strong prevailing winds off of Lake Michigan, and we have a lot of glass on this building. So what we're looking at here is a dew point analysis. And so the mass timber is, the structural slab is where you can see the 3 screws coming into it. So one from the bottom, two from the bottom, one from the top. Everything outboard of that line is basically various kinds of insulation, air and water barrier, and waterproofing. This early study shows the dew point making its way into the cross-laminated timber. So anything that's red represents in extreme cases where the dew point is going to get into the structure. So this is an early study. And we can see that the dew point is making its way into the CLT, which is not desirable, even though it is protected either 2 or 3 plies of the 5 ply, the end grain is exposed. And so aside from, physically protecting it, we want to make sure that moisture stays well away from it. And so in these window wall systems, we basically worked with the manufacturers and with a facade engineer. And if you go to the next slide, by the 6 different iteration of window wall, you can see we came up with an insulating gasket detail and a spandrel detail that kept the dew point well away from the cross-laminated timber. So this is a slightly different kind of analysis that you have to do in a timber building. Again, the wood is physically protected, but this is sort of a function of a belt and suspenders approach. Again, we have very high winds coming off the lake at certain times. And so, our other consideration in this is, aside from temperature, is wind-driven water. And so had to be very careful about how we get water out of this wall system, which, we have a saying in the industry, water always wins. It will get in, and it only becomes really problematic if you don't give it a way to get out, which we have done here. So next slide, please. Other considerations that I spoke about earlier. So this is a cutaway of Ascent. And so we'll be doing this exercise at Adelaide Pointe where we bring on the MEP engineers and we basically build a digital twin of the building. So this was a real-time cut during a design coordination meeting with all of the engineers, all of the contractors, the architects, and the structural engineers. And so, anything you see in orange is air distribution, green is fire protection, teal is electric, etc. Because every hole is pre-drilled in the timber down to a precision of about 3 millimeters. These are drilled in the factory by a CNC machine. We literally had, in this particular project, we won't have as many as at Adelaide Pointe, but we'll have a lot, where we are coordinating every piece of infrastructure that lives above the ceiling. Because this model gets fed, when we have a manufacturer, it gets fed to their CNC machines for production. This model is actually used to fabricate the timber. And so one consideration in mass timber is that there is a lot more coordination that happens ahead of construction, but it more than pays for itself during construction in terms of both speed and ease of construction, because they're not really, there's no hot work because everything is pre-drilled, and they're really just assembling a kit of parts that's already ready to receive the components by the time the trades are on site. So it's paid dividends. It's a little painful up front, but again, it more than pays for itself. So next slide, please. And here we are, I think this is the last slide, just a kind of a summary of the project. And we are through kind of schematic design and are thinking about advancing the documents for a hopeful Emily, spring of 23 groundbreaking.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess we're looking at Ascent now. So this is from last Sunday. So the red lines are the material hoists. Those are coming down next week. So that's a pretty big milestone. And according to CTBUH, as of today, we are architecturally topped out. So
congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming. So not to upstage Adelaide Pointe with Ascent, but just did want to share that pic of this big project in Milwaukee. But again, here's Adelaide Pointe, condo building of the future. And just thank you, Jason, and thank you, Emily, for your presentations just now. I think I, have talked with you both numerous times about this project, and I just learned a whole bunch more about it. There's always something new to learn, and I'm sure that our audience, which includes a lot of folks from the AEC industry, as well as others, have learned a lot as well. And we have some questions that have come in. And I also have a question that I want to start with for Jason. But first, I did want to say specifically, this is a project that's in progress. You're in the design phase. You're doing a lot of your site work right now. And, oftentimes when we hear about and we get the opportunity to talk about a mass timber project, it's after it's been built. So I just wanted to thank you for being willing to share what you're learning and kind of in process with at this stage of the project to help others in Michigan and in our audience think about how they can move forward with mass timber projects too. I think that's
thank you for that. One thing I failed to touch on that I did want to talk about specific to Adelaide Pointe is, and Sandra, you and I were talking about this before the seminar. So Wisconsin and Michigan live under the same version of the International Building Code at this point. And with ownership early on, and this is again almost a year ago, we were sort of grappling with how big we should make these buildings and what sort of lift we should ask for from the authorities having jurisdiction. And just as a point of reference, so what we're doing with Adelaide Pointe is, and I didn't have a really great place to explain it, but what we're doing is we're building this as a type 3A building, which is as of right. So we're not referencing any timber provisions in the IBC for this building. The reality is the mass timber slabs carry a better fire rating than code requires. So we're actually, from a technical standpoint, we're better than type 3 from a fire rating standpoint. But we are building this building as of right. And, we kind of, with ownership, sort of collectively decided that A, 55 units is a good way to test the market, and B, 6 stories is plenty tall for this site. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. I'd forgotten to mention that.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful in the question that I wanted to pose related to the building codes too. So there's a perfect segue. So I'm going to go back to the Ascent Tower pic just so it's there while we're talking about it. As you said, Michigan is currently operating the Michigan 2015 building code that reflects the 2015 International Building Code elements that relate to mass timber. The state of Michigan is currently in the process of updating a draft based on 2018 International Building Code, which does include some updates to mass timber related codes. There's a number of stakeholders in Michigan, including, Mass Timber at MSU, that's been talking with the state about while this 2018 rulemaking process is open, why not incorporate by reference the 14 new mass timber elements that the International Code Council adopted in the 2021 International Building Code, which allow you to go taller, allow more mass timber to be exposed, et cetera. I'm not going to dive into the nuts and bolts of that. That's another webinar. But, you know, we're hoping to see that happen here in Michigan. And I had an opportunity last week to talk to the Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services and some of her team who came to visit our STEM facility here at MSU, the first mass timber structure in Michigan, to talk about building codes and other things. And I learned that that department, which is the department that regulates codes in Wisconsin, has already sent up for approval to the governor, and then it would go to the legislature in that state, a package that would adopt those 2021 mass timber elements from the International Building Code. However, it looks like too, the Ascent project and kind of the process of getting the variances that you needed to get to build tall with mass timber in Wisconsin has inspired additional conversation in Wisconsin about potentially going farther and going beyond 2021 sooner. So Jason, I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So we, so again, speaking to the code that both of our states live under, almost every version, or rather every version of the IBC that I'm aware of, in the first chapter has a provision in it that allows for an AMMR approach to approvals, which is alternative materials and methods. That is, there's language in the code in Michigan, just like there is here right now, that says if you can prove to the authorities that what you're proposing is as safe or safer than the prescribed methodologies that are laid out in the building code, that there's a path to approval. Now, that language exists. It's almost varies from municipality to municipality, whether the code officials that govern any particular property will accept that language. So we have certain cities, for instance, here that embrace that language. We also have certain cities here in Wisconsin that reject it outright. And that's going to be, and we're seeing that in the suburbs of Chicago as well, where they're just, the answer is no, no matter what the code says. And the authorities have that power. So it's really having a sympathetic authority, having jurisdiction in wherever you're working. And so again, given all the other envelopes that the Leestmas are pushing in Muskegon, we decided not to push that envelope, at least in the first building. Yeah. If it's a smash hit and we decide the next one needs to be 8 stories, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But we know what the path is. And Emily can speak to this better than me, but from my perspective, the city has been great to work with and very helpful.
Yeah, I've heard the same from the team. And I just, you know, for folks on this webinar who are from Michigan, we're going to be following what's happening with the Wisconsin codes carefully and with the Michigan codes. So if you have questions about that at any time, don't hesitate to contact me. My contact information will be available on the last slide today. We're getting close to running out of time, but we have several questions coming in from the audience. Some of them have quick answers and some of them don't. So I'm going to go with the one that's probably has the longer answer first. And this one's for you, Emily. The question is, with all the emphasis on sustainability, local involvement, why did you guys select Binderholz, which is not a North American company? And you touched on that a little bit, but maybe you could dive into some of the trade-offs that you evaluated in making that decision.
So Binderholz is actually going to be our supplier for the multi-use building because we're on such a time crunch. They're really the only timber supplier that wasn't that had the capacity to deliver timber when we needed it in 2022. So turnaround time for timber is anywhere between 10 to 15 months, depending on the companies. I don't know if Jason has experience with anything longer, but those are the quoted times that we got. We're seriously looking at partnering with Element 5, based out of Toronto, which is about as local as we can get in Michigan, to work on the condo building. So we're actually going through some engineering with them as well, because those projects are a little bit farther out. For this first building, it was really just a matter of expedience. And one thing that we can, we're looking at potentially doing, don't quote me on this, but we'd love to source the Michigan wood for portions of our project. This is something that's very new to Michigan. And so, you know, I don't want to throw this out there as something we're definitely doing. But if anyone on this call has any ideas for that as well, that's something that would be very important for us. You know, if it's possible. A lot of Michigan timber is on state or federal owned land, and so a lot of it we can't mill. But there is some timber that's, you know, it's possible to partner with. You know, there's some sawmills in Michigan that are possible to partner with, and pretty easy access from Michigan to Toronto. So that's definitely something we're looking for in the future. And yes, we are definitely looking at using a more, not as local as we can get, company based out of Toronto for some of our future buildings.
Thank you, Emily. That was a really helpful and thoughtful response. And I think I would add to it just that, you know, we know from emerging life cycle analysis models that even bringing mass timber in from overseas typically has a lower embodied carbon footprint than sourcing other types of building materials that maybe are more carbon intensive to produce and transport, and that, you know, certainly don't store carbon in the building like mass timber does. So yeah, but certainly a priority for the state of Michigan and some of our friends regionally is to increase the amount of mass timber manufacture that's happening here in North America, and especially in the Great Lakes region. So we're looking for partners to have conversations about that always. Another question that arose related to kind of building design, what are the HVAC systems proposed for the building?
As of right now, we're very early on, but conceptually, we are proposing a fairly straightforward HVAC system with, because it's a for sale and these are privately owned residences, each unit will have its own furnace in unit, and each unit will have its own air conditioning condenser, which is going to be located down a central spine on the roof. So there's a condenser farm on the roof right now, surrounded by these solar panels, which you see around the perimeter, and then a super high efficiency furnaces inside the units.
Great, thanks for that, Jason, appreciate it. Normally I promise always to end on time when we do these, and that would be the start of the 1 o'clock hour. I think if it's okay, Emily and Jason, we just have a couple more questions that I think have quick answers. Do you mind if we keep you for another few minutes?
That's fine.
Great. Next question from Dave Newman at the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Have you considered using a biomass or wood chip fired district heat system for this complex as another green energy enhancement? So related question.
We haven't yet, but I would also just say, to follow up on my earlier point, we are so early that we have not yet engaged any MEP engineering on this building. So everything is on the table at this point. Can you repeat the system name again? I'm going to write it down.
Yeah, a biomass or wood chip fired district heat system. And I'm going to volunteer Dave Newman to talk to you about that. If you have questions, I can put you in touch.
Okay, great.
I will say, Dave, you're not the first person who's asked me about this. So my rule of thumb is always, if I hear it more than once, I really have to know. So you got it.
It's all on the table, which is very exciting. How will the condos furnaces be vented, and how will ventilation air be provided? Is that a question that's redundant with what we just said, or additive to what we just said?
It's additive. So the code allows us to provide fresh air to the units through operable windows. And if you recall the earlier renderings, the whole point of this building's design is that this entire wall that you see in front of you is basically is operable. So opportunities for fresh air are abundant. Furnaces are basically vented generally through the wall. There's a small vent. They'll likely come out, the vents will probably likely come out on the land side. Again, with not having engaged engineers yet. You know, as we sit here today, we're proposing a pretty typical system, very much subject to change, however.
Great, thank you, that's helpful. And then there's one last question in the hopper, and Emily, this one's for you. Are you taking deposits yet to buy condos?
Yes. We're actually almost 3/4 of the way to our reservation requirement in order to start building, which is great news for us because we haven't even, like I said, we haven't even put roads in yet, but the demand is so high. We're really trying to meet that. So we have two great realtors from Green Ridge Realty, Tom and Alyssa, and I think they're on this webinar. They might be able to type in the chat their information. If not, reach out to me and I can make sure to connect you.
I think I do see them here, so feel free to type into the chat. And then, Emily, what's the URL for Adelaide Pointe?
It's www.adelaidepointe, point with an E because we're cool.com.
So cool. Edgy. But that's great. So yeah, Adelaide Pointe, you can see the words Adelaide Pointe on your screen right now, .com, to learn more about the project and also probably to find some contact information related to the last question that we had. I think with that, it's time to close the webinar, unless Emily or Jason, there was anything you wanted to add, a final thought that you thought was critical for our audience to hear from you.
I just want to say real quick, if I know there are some more, it looks like there's some more comments and things in the hopper. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions, if you have any additional suggestions. We're always open to this. This is a process of learning for both Ryan and I, using sustainable design for this entire community. So happy to hear those and really excited about all the excitement in Michigan about mass timber building.
Great, and I see that there are some things in the chat. I'll try to, Christian, could you pull a copy of the things that are in the chat and save them in a document for us so we can reach out to Jason and Emily and see if there's any questions that we should follow up with when we send the webinar recording? I would appreciate that. And so finally, again, thank you, Emily Leestma, Leestma Management, Jason Korb, Korb Architects, for coming and today to talk about Adelaide Pointe, the wonderful redevelopment project in Muskegon. We'll be following the project and learning more about it in the coming weeks and months. And it's time for me to bring us to the close of our webinar as soon as I can advance my slide by sharing with you a few upcoming opportunities that Mass Timber at MSU and our partners are offering. First, the International Mass Timber Conference is coming up in Portland, Oregon, April 12th through 14th. If you would like to join our delegation of Michigan folks, more than 50 of us are going and participating together in the conference. Please contact me. You can see my contact information there. I have a 10% discount for participants from the industry. The conference itself has great rates for folks working in the public sector, in education, and the nonprofit sector. For folks in the industry, I have a 10% discount code you can use, so let me know if you'd like to join us. We're going to be hosting a reception for our Michigan group on the night of April 12th in Portland. So if you are from Michigan and you come, let me know so we can make sure you can attend that with us. And then our next Mass Timber webinar in this series will be in May. I don't know the date yet, but it's going to be a report back of some elements of the International Mass Timber Conference by folks who attended. Not completely certain what that content will look like yet. It'll be what inspires us at the conference, and we'll bring some of the things that we've learned to you. And with that, thank you all for joining us for this Mass Timber webinar, bringing mass timber to Lumbertown, Adelaide Pointe's Muskegon Lake Vision. Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everyone.